She was the only person in her family who kept a promise. Her mother-in-law had the same secret and couldn't hold it for 24 hours. And when the whole thing blew up, when the lies started stacking and the family tore itself apart, guess who took the blame? That's right, the one person with nothing to be ashamed of. This is a story about what happens when you do everything right inside a family that has never rewarded right. She held her word. She told the truth at the exact moment truth was needed. She stood in the crossfire with nothing to hide. And she still got handed the bill. Because that's how certain families operate. They protect the chaos and punish whoever dares to name it. This is about a woman who spent 13 years inside that system and the 4 days that finally made it impossible to ignore. Let me take you back to where this started. Her sister-in-law held a political position in the municipality where they all lived. Real responsibilities, real decisions, and occasionally information that wasn't ready to be public yet. One day, she came to our narrator, we'll call her Julia, carrying something. A piece of strategic information connected to her work. Not top secret. Nothing that would trigger investigations or violate oaths of office, but sensitive enough that it needed to stay contained for exactly 4 days, just long enough for a formal meeting to happen, for the people directly involved to be informed properly, and for the news to land on the right ears first. After the meeting, the secret wouldn't be a secret anymore. Just 4 days of discretion. That's all she was asking. Julia agreed without hesitation, but here's the detail that matters. The sister-in-law had also told her mother, Julia's mother-in-law. Both women had the same secret, the same instruction, the same 4-day window. The clock was already ticking, and only one of those two women was paying any attention to it. For one day the secret held. Julia went about her life keeping her word without effort or drama. A promise is a promise. Then, on the second day, her partner came home carrying that particular energy, the energy of someone who thinks they know something you don't. He had a secret, he said. Something interesting. He just heard it. Julia let him talk. And within a few sentences, her stomach dropped. It was the same information. Every detail. The exact same intelligence his sister had shared with Julia 2 days earlier in confidence. He didn't know Julia already knew. He thought he was bringing her something exclusive. Julia stopped him mid-sentence. She said she was already aware of it. She didn't tell him how, she just said she knew. And then she asked, casually, where he'd heard it from. His mother, he said. His mother had told him. Let that land for a moment. The 4-day window had barely survived one. The secret meant for 2 people had already touched 4. And the only one who hadn't told a single soul was Julia. Now Julia had a choice. She could say nothing. Let the meeting happen. Let the secret go public as planned, and pretend she never noticed that the information had already been traveling through the family without permission. Or she could tell the sister-in-law the truth. Her mother had broken the promise. Here's the thing. A woman in a political position trusted exactly 2 people with something sensitive. One of them had already failed her. She had a right to know that. So when the sister-in-law came to visit a few hours later, Julia told her quietly, her mother had already passed the secret on. That's it. No dramatic speech. No accusation. Just the facts delivered to the person who most needed to have them. What happened next was exactly what you would expect. The sister-in-law confronted her mother, and the confrontation turned volcanic. Because the truth, when it arrives in a family that has spent years keeping it out, rarely arrives quietly. The mother-in-law did what people who have spent a lifetime avoiding accountability always do when they're cornered. She lied, not once, 3 times, 3 completely different stories delivered back to back without shame. First, she hadn't told anyone anything, total denial, confident, insulting in its directness. When that crumbled because her own son had already named her as the source, she pivoted. Her husband must have told him. Redirect. Absorb the accusation into someone else. When that version didn't hold either, she landed on the 3rd story. Julia had told him. The daughter-in-law who had kept her word for 4 straight days was now, apparently, the source of the leak. Look at the architecture of those 3 lies. Denial, deflection, attack. She didn't stumble into them, she constructed them in real time, pivoting between stories the way you only can when you've had years of practice escaping consequences. And she landed, finally, on blaming the one person in the room with the cleanest record. That is not a mistake. That is a method. And then Julia's partner turned on her. Not his mother, who had broken a promise within 24 hours. Not himself, who had received that secret secondhand and immediately tried to pass it on. Julia. He said the family was in conflict because she couldn't keep her mouth shut. Let's be exact about his logic, because it deserves to be examined. His mother got confidential information and told her husband and her son. He got that information and tried to tell Julia. Julia, who already knew, told the original source that it had leaked. In his account, steps 1 and 2 were fine. Step 3 was the problem. The person who reported the breach was more culpable than the people who committed it. If that sounds familiar, it should. It is the logic of every closed system that cannot survive transparency. Don't name the conflict, don't make the damage visible. And if you disrupt the comfort of the people in charge, whatever follows is entirely your fault. Julia had been living inside that system for 13 years. This was the first time she had refused to accept the bill. The next morning, he woke up like nothing had happened. Smiles, small talk, good mood, no acknowledgement, no conversation, no attempt at resolution. That's how conflict worked in this house. It didn't get resolved, it got covered. Paved flat and walked on until the next time it was needed as ammunition. Julia had watched this cycle for over a decade, and in her update she said something that quietly reframed everything that came before it. His loyalty toward her had always come last. Keeping promises, keeping secrets, being faithful, always, consistently, last. She'd honored his sister's secret partly because on some level she already knew where she stood in this family's hierarchy. 13 years of being placed at the back of the line recalibrates a person. You stop adjusting yourself around someone who never adjusts for you. You start honoring the people who actually treat your word like it means something. And without entirely realizing it, that is exactly what Julia had done. Now here's the detail that this story buries if you're moving too fast to catch it. The sister-in-law revealed after everything settled that the secret had been in part a test. A quiet, deliberate experiment to find out whether her mother could be trusted. She had suspicions going back years, probably. This was just the first time she'd created clean conditions to confirm them, and the mother-in-law failed. She failed a test she didn't even know she was taking. She failed it in under a day. And then, when confronted, she lied 3 separate times, blamed 2 other people, and ultimately called the entire situation a mountain out of a molehill. That phrase, that specific phrase. She didn't just break a promise to her own daughter. She falsely accused her daughter-in-law. She sent her son into a confrontation with the wrong person. She manufactured 3 different stories and stood behind each one. And then she suggested everyone was overreacting. That is the move of someone so thoroughly protected from consequences for so long that she has genuinely lost the ability to recognize them arriving. The sister-in-law told Julia she intends to distance herself from the family. She's stepping back from the mother-in-law, the dynamic, all of it. And Julia, who has watched this family for 13 years, already knows the story being written for her. She'll be blamed for that too. The woman who kept the secret will be made responsible for the woman who couldn't. The person who told the truth will be held accountable for every consequence that truth produced. That is the final architecture of this kind of system. No matter how clean your hands are, the designated target absorbs the cost. But notice what Julia did after 2 missed calls from her mother-in-law. She sent 1 message. She wasn't discussing the situation further. No energy, no space, no more room in her life for this particular argument. That isn't the message of someone in defeat. That's the message of someone who has finally stopped carrying a debt she never agreed to take on. 13 years, and she's still standing. Just not in the same place she was. So what does cold karma look like in a story like this? It doesn't always arrive loud. Julia held a promise in a family where promises are optional. She told the truth in a family that punishes truth-telling. She stood firm in a system designed to make that impossible. And she got blamed, targeted, and left standing alone while the people who actually broke things smiled over breakfast. But look at what also happened. A sister-in-law who suspected her mother for years now has her answer, documented and undeniable. A mother-in-law who spent a lifetime covering her tracks has finally run out of road. And a woman in a 13-year relationship now sees, with perfect clarity, exactly where she has always stood, and is choosing, quietly, without drama, not to stand there anymore. Cold karma doesn't always announce itself with a single satisfying moment. Sometimes it's just the truth catching up at exactly the right time, leaving every lie exposed in the open, with nowhere left to hide. If this story hit different, the kind of quiet injustice that doesn't make the news but lives in real houses, in real families, all over the world, drop a like. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear stories like this one. Subscribe if you want more. We post daily, and every story is about someone who found out that integrity, in the end, outlasts everything else. And tell me in the comments, was Julia right to tell the sister-in-law what she'd found out? Or would you have stayed quiet and let the 4 days run their course? I want to know, because the most interesting part of a story like this is never just what happened. It's what you would have done. Cold karma doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just shows up quietly and changes everything.